Welcome back to Gray and Gritty. My name is LJ Winnefeld.
And I am Sandy Winnefeld, the Gray.
And Dad, Alex Ovechkin scored his fourth goal in as many games tonight as we're literally recording this podcast. Unfortunately, we can't watch unless we did a VPN because it's blacked out on ESPN+. But what do you think about the tail end of this Capitals season?
The Great Eight. The Capitals have struggled a little bit this year, but it's a whole new season if they make it into the playoffs, and we'll see what happens. Really look forward to being at the game on Tuesday night against the Canadiens, my second favorite team in the National Hockey League, where we hope to spend a little bit of time with Jeff Molson, who's the controlling owner of the Montreal Canadiens. He's a terrific guy. They've got a great team with a really fast offense. Should be a terrific game, but we'll see what happens at the end of the season.
Yeah, one thing I would tell every American hockey fan to go do is go to a game in Canada. If you haven't done that yet, I would absolutely do it. The fans are amazing. The experience, in my opinion, is noticeably different from an experience in the United States. Not better or worse necessarily, just very distinctly different. And I think watching a game in a country where that sport was born is definitely something that every American hockey fan should find their way up to go do.
The Canadians aren't too happy with us right now, but they're still, some of the most polite people on earth. And you're absolutely right. Going to a hockey arena in Canada is truly an experience.
Yeah. The other thing happening tonight is the Golden Globes. We're recording this on Sunday. It's going to come out on Tuesday. But what are your thoughts on the Golden Globes, Dad?
I don't really follow the entertainment industry because even though these people are very talented and they've worked very hard, I think they're a little bit self-indulgent and we pay way too much attention to them. So don't look for me with my face glued to the TV. I'd rather watch the NFL playoffs with the Patriots taking on the Chargers.
Yeah, and we're doing this in between the two games tonight, trying to squeeze in a quick recording. But yeah, when it comes to the Oscars or Golden Globes or any of this stuff, really the only thing I use it for is I look back at who actually won, what films, what shows, and then I use that as kind of like a basis or a metric to go and watch stuff later on. If I find myself on board and I want to go find a movie, if it's got a ton of Oscar nominations or wins, then maybe that would be a good movie to watch.
Yeah, and I'm a pretty centrist guy politically, and I cringe when I see some of the political statements.
It's so political now. I feel like it's been politicized like a lot of other things in our country. But the great thing is that football and hockey, for the large part, have not been co-opted by politics. So
not yet.
But we've got a couple of things on the docket that we want to talk about today. These have broken pretty recently. The first one, we're going to talk about the protests that are happening in Iran, and then we're going to shift and talk briefly about what's happening with Greenland and all of the rhetoric surrounding Greenland. So, Dad, let's get started first with Iran. I'll kind of set the scene here, and then we can chat about it. Over the past 2 weeks, Iran has been hit by its biggest wave of anti-regime unrest in years. The immediate trigger is economic. A sharp currency slide, rising prices in the sense that the system can't or won't stabilize daily life. The government response has been heavy. Multiple outlets and human rights groups report sweeping crackdowns, mass arrests, and a major communications blackout. I've seen that their internet is completely down all across the country, which makes this verification very difficult. There's a lot of different numbers that are out there. The AP is reporting over 500 deaths and arrests. In arrests in the tens of thousands. I saw a video on Instagram today, which is where I get some of my on-the-ground news. There's a ton of different accounts on Instagram that have eyewitness videos and accounts that come in, pretty trying to just give you a facts-based picture of what's happening. And this one was a video of a monitor in one of the local cities, like the local, government centers, where they were showing pictures of the deceased on a screen, and there were 250 different photos. So I know for a fact that there are at least 250 deaths. But this is something relatively unprecedented. Iran has had a history of unrest since the Ayatollah took over in 1979, but nothing on this scale. What would you do, Dad, if you were sitting on the National Security Council, or if you were the president yourself right now? What would you do in response to what's happening in Iran?
So, first of all, I'll tell you, the Iranian population challenging their government only happens now and then. It's happened a couple of times in the past, but the Iranian regime has either done a very good job of suppressing it or sometimes they release a few social restrictions in order to make the population happy and it just kind of goes away. This feels a little different. It's truly violent. And so it may be the best chance to have a regime change of a regime that's been the source of almost every conflict in the Middle East in the last half century. There's a common refrain that says, anytime you see trouble in the Middle East, there's usually an Iranian standing behind it. Now, President Trump has hinted fairly broadly in the media that if Iran continues to kill their protesters, that the United States will take some kind of action. First of all, what would that look like? Well, we can't change, and we shouldn't try to change the regime like we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. That was massive numbers of troops on the ground. It took 2 decades. We lost a lot of people, and it just didn't work. But, there is potential for us to maybe help the protesters here and let the Iranian people handle this themselves. So, if we were to intervene with military force, which would almost certainly be from the air. It would not be troops on the ground. There's no way for that. The Trump's base would absolutely revolt on him if he did that. He doesn't want to do that, but there are some things he could do. The first question, and we asked this about Venezuela, what is the legal justification? It's a little bit shaky. But there is a doctrine we've talked about before in writing on Gray and Gritty about something called legitimacy, where if you have something really heinous going on, and you have a coalition of nations that feel like they need to do something, but there's no option available under strict international law, you can use the legitimacy doctrine to intervene. In that case, it really helps in that legitimacy case to have allies. But unfortunately, because of the recent intervention in Venezuela, our allies might be reluctant to come onto our side due to that. And it would certainly be a mistake probably to bring in Israel, because that would introduce a whole new dimension into this fight. So we'll see what happens on the legal side. So the question then is, how do you hinder the clerics and their surrogates, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and their ability to suppress their own population? I can tell you right now, it won't be kidnapping the Ayatollah like we took Maduro out of Venezuela. There's no way to do that. And it's not close air support, because that's, in close, you could get, lose a lot of aircraft doing that. It's really going to be more about going back to the 2 pillars of denying objectives and imposing costs. And if you want to deny the objectives of the Iranian regime in suppressing their protesters, then you start to take out central government buildings where decisions are made, where the government has its base. You take out especially the Central Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC headquarters, but you're also probably going to have to go out and find, using intelligence, those local IRGC headquarters, their centers of gravity, and somehow take them out. And we have ways of doing that, some of which I can't discuss on the podcast. Otherwise, you could use Tomahawk missiles or aircraft, that kind of thing. But it's going to require a lot of exquisite intelligence. And you also, at the same time, because Iran has threatened to take out regional U.S. bases in the Middle East, you have to take out their ability to retaliate against those bases. And then the second thing, and I won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but the imposed cost side of it is, if you're going to keep suppressing your protesters, we're going to take out some of your economic target that's going to make it even harder for you to keep the population on your side. But you want to be careful with those targets, because you want to be able to mitigate the effects of that imposed cost piece if the regime falls, because you're going to want to rapidly help the Iranian population, the Iranian nation, pull itself up by its bootstraps and become a successful country once again. It's been 56 years since the revolution, and this may be the best chance we have of reversing this awful regime and its influence on the Middle East. So I'm a little bit out of character here. Normally I would say let's exercise restraint, but I'd be open to some well thought out legal case here and some well thought military action if it came down to our ability to do that. What do you think, LJ?
Yeah, I think that first of all, the biggest thing that for those that are not as well educated on Iran, there's a major difference between the IRGC and the Iranian military. The IRGC, stemming from the clerics, stemming from that arm of the government, as opposed to just being the army of Iran. And the IRGC are the folks that have been, spreading all kinds of terrorism throughout the Middle East. They're the ones that have been attacking troops in Iraq and Syria and all that. So very different than the Iranian army. The second thing here, and I don't know if a lot of people truly understand this, is that the Iranian people actually love America broadly, and the Persian people really, really like America. And I frankly think that most of them want to have a free, open, capitalist society that mimics the United States. And there's no reason why Iran and the United States could not be very strong strategic partners. It makes, frankly, the most sense outside of their leadership. They are the ones that are trying to stop this from happening, while the people, for the most part, actually really do like America. The biggest thing for me that has separated this from some of the other protests that have happened over the last decade is the massive communications blackout that's happened. Now, I can't remember necessarily if something on this scale happened previously, but the fact that they're doing this means that this is a serious threat and that it is perceived to potentially be existential. Whether it is or not, remains to be seen, but the fact that they are crushing all internet and communications means that Iran does not want people to communicate on the ground tactically. They also don't want the strategic impact of this getting out to the rest of the world, like it already has and inevitably will, just based off of the kind of world that we live in with technology. If I were the president, and I frankly, I err a little bit more on the side of not getting involved, even though I would love to see the regime in Iran change. I don't know if I would get involved. And really it kind of boils down to two reasons. The first one is I think that if the United States and Israel especially start to get involved, then the narrative from the regime can be this was all driven by the United States. This is not a groundswell of support from a grassroots movement to cause this unrest, but it was actually stoked by the evil empire, by Satan in the United States. And the second is, we have been involved broadly throughout the entire world lately in ways that, again, have kind of eroded the rules-based order. And I think that, if you just every single time you continue to get involved, I think right now for me, I don't know if I would get involved with something like Iran, particularly with kinetic strikes. And I don't know necessarily, too, what kinetic strikes would buy you unless there was a no-kidding regime change. Because if you did take out buildings, if you did take out leaders, this may just boil over in a couple of months, and all you've done is just set back relations even further. So I'm not there yet, like you are, Dad, in terms of actually getting involved. But I could definitely see the pathway and the logic for that.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. First, I don't disagree with you. I think we'd have to have a lot more information and a little bit more urgency, movement on the part of the Iranian people before we would actually get involved. This is not something I would do tonight, but I would watch it closely and be ready. Certainly the planning has to go on. Three things I would say. One, the Iranian government has shut down communications before. And as you point out, they're worried when they start cutting off the internet. But technology is advanced enough that it's easier and easier for people to get connected out to the outside world, either using Starlink or something like that. So they can't completely shut it down. Second, there is a real question of if the Ayatollahs run for their lives and have a problem. The IRGC is so pervasive throughout Iranian society, and they have so much power and so many weapons. It's going to take a real grassroots movement with a lot of sacrificed lives in order for the Iranian people to get this done. But it is not impossible. And I look back at what happened in 1979, when the reason why the Shah fell, among all of the other corruption and mistakes that he made, is that there was a charismatic figure outside the country who could survive, who was not targeted. He wasn't inside the country where he could be apprehended and jailed or killed or something like that. Ayatollah Khomeini was who we're talking about. Well, right now, the only figure out there that falls into that category is the former Shah's, Reza Pahlavi's son, who is older now. He's not his father. He's making a lot of noise. He had an op-ed in the Washington Post the other day about, hey, I'm the guy. I don't want to go back and be the Shah. I want to be the person who goes in there and transforms Iran into a true democracy. It's unknown to me. He claims that he has a lot of support inside Iran. The press kind of hints that he might, but it remains to be seen whether this is the charismatic figure that can go into Iran if there's total chaos and bring order out of that chaos. This is going to be really fascinating. It's going to be one of the big stories of 2026 if it happens, or it could just blow up and fizzle out, like has happened several other times during this revolutionary regime's tenure. I'm on the edge of my seat because I would love nothing more than to see a different Iran in the Middle East. It would certainly help tamp down a lot of the instability in that very important part of the world.
You mentioned a charismatic figure on the outside, and I think that's a great point, especially with the Shah's son being that individual who could survive something like this and continue to stoke it from the outside. And that also goes back to my previous point of if there is perceived U.S. involvement, or if the U.S. takes steps to strike sites or help stoke violence and protesting. What I could also see, too, is it's already violent and they're already killing civilians. But I could just see it getting worse as the regime starts to lose its grip, or using U.S. strikes, U.S. influence, U.S. meddling to just kill more people outright to try and put this thing down even faster. I don't know if they necessarily need that permission structure. They may not, but I definitely could see that could happen. The other thing, too, is the whole Israel piece, right? If Israel gets involved, and frankly, they may already be planning something, because they've already kicked Israel pretty far down, but now that they're struggling and now that there's unrest, I can just sense that Israel is licking their chops to try and get even further and cause even more irreparable damage to the Islamic State.
Well, you can count on Mossad being in there doing whatever they can. I want to underscore one of the points you made earlier. And Iranians, Persian society is a very sophisticated, well-educated society.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't necessarily go so far as to say they love Americans, but they really do like us. There's an old saying that says in the Sunni Arab nations that the leadership loves us, but the population hates us, and that in Iran, the leaders hate us, and the population actually does like us.
Yeah.
So who knows what's going to happen? It's 2026 is off with a bang.
Yeah,
we shall see what happens.
To that point, too, I mean, the reason why I know that is that there were stories when social media was first becoming widespread across the world, that there were a lot of Iranians that were interacting with Americans on social media, and the conversations they surprised me when I was younger, early 20s, teenager, because I thought that everybody in Iran, kind of like North Korea, right? Everybody in North Korea is brainwashed to hate America, and I thought that was something similar in Iran, and it's really not. But one of the things you talk about 2026 being off to a start, and is this going to blow up to be something bigger than it already is? There is a trope on social media running around all these accounts that have eyewitness reports, videos, and things like that, where I get some of that on-the-ground news before I read it in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. In the comments section, everybody says nothing ever happens. Because it seems like, especially nowadays with mass media, with social media, 24-hour news, that a lot of this stuff gets built up. And this is a big deal, don't get me wrong, but it gets blown up and everyone's like, oh, this can be the end of the regime, this can mean XYZ. People were saying that about Venezuela before we went in and took Maduro. But the whole trope is nothing ever happens. Because everybody builds this thing up and then nothing ever really happens. So this could be totally insignificant. We could be talking about something, and we likely will be talking about something completely different in 2 shows, because it just seems like these things come into the news and fall out of the news at the cyclic rate. But
Yep, with the bright, shiny object. So just for entertainment value, I'm going to tell a couple stories. One, regarding Iran. When I was going through flight school, the revolution had not yet happened. I was there in late 1978 and early 1979 as the revolution started to happen. And we had Iranian flight students in Pensacola because Iran was the only country we exported the F-14 to. And of course, I was going to be a F-14 pilot. And it was interesting to watch these guys with their Camaros and all that kind of stuff. And none of them liked to swim, and you had to pass the mile swim and all that kind of stuff. And one day, I went into the officers club, and there was some Iranians there, and I stole a hat from the O Club. And I'll never forget the name of that was inside the hat. It was Mehdi Bayat. And I always wondered what happened to old Mehdi, whether he fell with the regime or he went back and became an Air Force pilot in Iran flying the F-14. I've always wondered about that. And to zoom forward, I spent a substantial part of my early career on a combat air patrol station off the coast of Chabahar in Iran, theoretically, if the Iranians came out to come after our aircraft carrier, because we were there, that's what was going on back in the early 1980s. And so I decided to write a novel, and which I never did, but I had this plot in the novel where the intrepid pilot was going to have to jump out of his F-14 and was going to land in Iran and had to evade and would go to the airfield at Chabahar, which was not far from the coast, and see an F-14 there and steal it. Well, if you zoom forward to the second Top Gun movie, there's an awful lot of similarities there. I don't want to ruin it for anybody.
Yeah.
So when I found out through sneaky, clever means that the movie was actually going to have that as the end of its plot, I wanted to get my idea on the ground first. I wasn't going to challenge, Paramount or anything like that. There's no way I was going to do that. So I wrote a short story called Reunion, and Mehdi Bayat, the old F-14, Iranian guy, appears in that story. And if you ever want to look at it, it's called Reunion. It's behind a paywall on the Naval Institute website. If you look up my name and if you look up, Reunion, you might be able to read that story. It's kind of fun. And I took Stephen King's advice that when you write, you don't have the whole plot in your mind. You let the plot take you where you go while you're writing, and that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a great little short story. You say it's behind a paywall, but I think if you go, and this is a shout out to the Naval Institute and Proceedings itself, if you go to the Naval Institute Proceedings, you can read 5 articles for free. So if you want to, I'll link it in the show notes of this podcast. And so if you're interested, go ahead and click on it. It's actually a very good story, and I can attest it came out about a year before Top Gun 2 Maverick came out.
Yeah,
so
there you go.
Awesome. Well, let's move on to our second topic. We're going to talk a little bit about Greenland, because this has been in the news lately, especially after we took Maduro. Instantly, it seemed like overnight, the rhetoric pivoted to Greenland, which has obviously been on the president's list of territories that he would like to acquire. Some stats here before we kind of dive into discussion. Greenland is the world's largest island with about 56,000 people, most of them Inuit, and is a self-governing state, essentially, or territory inside the Kingdom of Denmark. So it's not necessarily directly a part of Denmark. The capital there runs most of their domestic issues, but Denmark still holds the defense and foreign policy keys for that government. In the news, like I said, it's in the news this week because Arctic competition is heating up, and U.S. rhetoric about controlling Greenland has spooked European allies. And I actually kind of don't buy that it's purely geography the more that I read about this, and we can get into that. But it definitely has a national security element to it and a geography element to it as well. What are your thoughts, Dad, on some of this rhetoric regarding Greenland? I mean, there's been a lot of concern about NATO. It seems like we already have pretty free-ranging access to anything we want in Greenland, and we have a great relationship, or at least we used to, with Denmark. So I want to get your thoughts on this. What do you think about all this?
Yeah, so this is a really strange one, LJ. I suppose President Trump is fresh from his initial success in Venezuela, so he feels like it might be a good time to bring up what he brought up early in his second term of, hey, we got to have, Greenland for our national security. And, psychologically, I have to think, like any, real estate or mob boss in New York, he feels the need to secure his neighborhood and kind of own his neighborhood. But, as you pointed out, he doesn't really have to do that with Venezuela. With Greenland. I mean, Greenland will give us anything we want militarily. If it's a military problem, it's like, hey, Denmark, hey, Greenland, we need to establish another base in this area because we're worried about the Chinese or we're worried about the Russians. There really is no reason why we have to actually own Greenland militarily. It's just not there. So you have to ask yourself, why does he feel this way, other than being the mob boss or the political boss that wants to control his neighborhood? And perhaps there are, the rare earths and natural resources that are buried under that ice as climate change starts to reveal them. Maybe there's something in there where he feels he's either going to personally profit from or the United States will profit from, some sort of hidden agenda there. That's, to me, what may be driving this. But it is baffling to me when you consider the incredibly disruptive effects that this would have on this, amazing NATO alliance that we've had for, 80 years. It would be the destruction of that alliance if the U.S. actually unilaterally went in and took over Greenland, which would be, a walk in the park, obviously, but it would be something that Vladimir Putin would absolutely love to see. I wonder if Vladimir behind the scenes is whispering in President Trump's ear, hey, maybe you ought to take Greenland. And if he does, it's going to be really disastrous.
Yeah, I think that there are really three reasons why he's looking at doing this. I think the first one is I think that the president wants to have a wide and free-ranging legacy. And if he's the guy that secures Greenland and brings it into the United States, you talk about, and again, real estate minded, right? So having that much geography added to the United States in a pretty key part of the globe. Also, if you look at maps, Greenland looks way bigger than it actually is. So I think to have that as a part of his legacy, I think is absolutely a driving factor. Now, I think some of the more strategic reasons why you would want to do this is, again, I talked a little bit about the rare earth metals, as well as some other. There's more gold in Greenland, I think, than anywhere else in the world. But then additionally, there is also some oil up there in the Arctic as well. And then finally, talking about the military, and the national security. So, it's a national security imperative that we get Greenland. Well, as ice melts, as global warming continues to accelerate, and a lot of those passageways continue to open up, it's not just necessarily, missile defense in Greenland, which we already have a missile, defense base up in Greenland right now, a Space Force base, but also the ability to influence global trade and traffic in what's going to quickly become a very, strategically important part of the world for, national defense and future military operations. I mean, even China, which technically does not have any territory above the Arctic Circle, is trying to stake a claim and trying to find ways to have influence in the Arctic. So I think that is another big piece of it as well. But I really think it comes down to legacy. It comes down to rare earth minerals, oil, and then finally, I think, if I'm going to be totally honest, I think that the national security piece is a back burner, because if it really was the primary issue, like we've talked about, he could go to Denmark and he could say, hey, I want to add more bases there. I want us to be able to put a Navy base there. I want to have a large military footprint because I believe XYZ. And the Danes would probably say, great, that's going to make Greenland more secure. It's going to, maybe stave off Russia a little bit, which is what is at the forefront of EU's mind right now. So I really think that is the last thing that they're worried about. It definitely is a part of this, but I think it's the last thing.
The other thing, another couple of things. One, if you look at the history of NATO military operations, and particularly in Afghanistan, one of the most unsung nations in NATO in terms of their willingness to participate is Denmark. Denmark's military is really good. They're small, small but mighty, but they've got a terrific military, and they've always been very supportive. So it really kind of pains me, as having been a former commander inside NATO and worked very closely with Danes on my staff, for us to be saying these kinds of things. The one thing that I give hope to is that if President Trump is finally convinced that this may not be such a good idea, he's very good at changing the subject. And hold up another bright, shiny object, and the press will follow him on to some other topic very, very quickly. So let's see what happens here.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it goes back to that trope of nothing ever happens. I think we're talking a lot about Greenland.
Let's hope in this case nothing ever happens.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking a lot about Greenland right now. I don't know how long this story is going to stick in the news or if anything's going to happen. But the other thing, too, that I think, if we're talking about, one other point that I thought about with rare earth minerals is, I don't know if folks understand broadly within the United States. I mean, I think that now rare earth minerals has started to enter the lexicon of more Americans. Maybe it's not, an everyday, a kitchen table issue. But I think that a lot more Americans, especially, more educated Americans, are starting to learn more and more about rare earth minerals. And so that kind of seems like a natural thing. Hey, Greenland, let us mine your rare earth minerals, because it's a national security imperative, so that we can continue to win the chip war, so that we can continue to have all this sophisticated robotics and computing and XYZ. Mining rare earth minerals is extremely difficult. It's very hard. It's horrible for the environment. And imagine something that is already very hard and complex and bad for the environment, and then doing it in the Arctic, where you have ice, you have to get through ice to get there. I am no mining expert, but I can only imagine that the amount of infrastructure and time and effort that would go into that. You probably will make a profit eventually. But you're going to have to provide a lot of incentives for companies to go in there or federally subsidize it, which means now you're pouring more money into this without a necessary guarantee of return. And if it takes more than a few years, this might just get reversed if if a Democrat comes into office, or if Congress tries to get involved and says, no, you will not do this, and removes funding. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's just a big quagmire here that could just unravel. And we could talk about this forever, but I do think that the benefits here are far outweighed by the possible risks, the detriments, and by the.
And by the way, if you're going to get rare earths, go down to Venezuela and get them. One of the things we talk about changing the subject. Whatever happened with Ukraine negotiations? This may be one of the. Venezuela certainly distracted everybody from the fact that the administration has not been successful, understandably, by the way, in bringing peace to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. There are good reasons why that is not going to happen, in my humble opinion. And so if you're not doing well there, why not change the subject to Venezuela? And then if Venezuela, you're taking a lot of criticism, why not change the subject to Greenland? So this conveyor belt of issues will continue to move down the road, and let's hope nothing happens here. So let's keep it on ice.
Yeah, I like that. Keep it
use a pun.
On ice. Well, and I saw a thing, to go back to was it Leif Erikson or whatever back, the Vikings. When they named Iceland, Iceland, even though it was green, and Greenland, even though it was ice, because they didn't want people going to Iceland, they wanted people going to Greenland. But to one thing on
is that kind of like why is that kind of like why do we call a driveway when we don't drive on it, and why do we call a parkway when we don't park on it?
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of like
all right. Sorry,
why do we call chicken but cow's beef when we cook it, right? We can go down this train of thought. But on the Ukraine piece, I don't know if you saw this, Dad, but there's been a lot of reporting lately that Ukraine is expecting a large scale operation, air assault or air attack or something like that on Kyiv, and they've put this warning. They thought it was going to happen on the 9th, so today, January 9th, Sunday, and it may happen before this comes out. But it's just a constant reminder that this thing's not going away, and it really hasn't gotten any better regardless of who's in office.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so let's stay tuned. It's going to be a busy week, a busy year. Look forward, and we'll keep you guys informed if you're listening to Gray and Gritty. Listen to the dialogue, and we'll have a lot to talk about this year.
And we're planning on recording our first paid subscribers only podcast here in the next 24 to 48 hours. It'll come out sometime late next week, and we're going to try and do that on a regular basis. For those of you that are paying subscribers and helping to support this, it is having a meaningful impact. Some of those impacts are taking a little bit of time, as we all lead very busy lives, and this is not our day job, but it is impacting our ability to bring you better content, higher quality content, and so we want to provide you something in return. But thank you for listening.
And we have a pretty good topic for that podcast too.
Yes, and we actually have a paid subscriber topic. So if you are a paying subscriber, or frankly a subscriber in general, and you want to hear us talk about something, feel free to leave us a comment. Shoot us a direct message either on Substack. We have an Instagram page as well, or just shoot one of the two of us a text message, and we'll talk about it on the pod, or we'll maybe write something up. And then if you're a paying subscriber, absolutely, those questions and those topics will be fielded in future podcasts and Substack articles as well. Well, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Gray and Gritty. We're going to be back at you next Tuesday with another episode, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot more to talk about then. But until then, thank you.